With us previously with Will Travers of Born Free, and he's an enormous supporter of animal-related charities. He's a remarkable guy. As I put into the flyer, it's tremendous to think that he's started with the BBC in 1987, edition of Radio 1, and then 1997 daily with his breakfast slot on Radio 5 Live. I think a number of you will know that he's moving from that to a new live program after all those years. There's the Big Questions, which he features very much in. And of course, the double BAFTA award-winning ITV's Long Lost Family. And I'm ashamed to say, we've only discovered that in the last year, and now sit absorbed at, we were just talking about this before, the discovery of families finding their family, which is in fact part of Nicky and the story that he tells. It was through the last presentation that Nicky kindly did with Will Travers that I asked whether he would consider doing a presentation, and he challenged me to buy the book, and I did. And as I was saying before, genuinely enjoyed it. One of the family, Why a Dog Called Maxwell Changed My Life. And I think the discovery in that and the honesty with which Nicky relays the experiences and issues and challenges of his life add to so much as a gloss to the individual. You see the individual on screen, on our television screens, and then you learn something about the individual and the personality. And that's why I'm particularly delighted that Carol Spears is here tonight, because I mentioned before, she's running a stress-related program in November, but also doing a presentation to us. So, ladies and gentlemen, members of the club, may I welcome Nicky and ask him to chat to us for 25, half an hour. We'll look forward to it hugely. Nicky, over to you, and thank you very much. I think you're just on mute, sir. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I've done my talk. I did it for 25 minutes. It's over. I was on mute though. I've been up since 4:10 in the morning. And as you said, Stephen, I'm moving from 6:30 until 10. I'm moving to 9 until 11, a 2-hour talking to the public phone-in slot. So I'll be able to get up at the luxuriously late time of 5:45, because I've been getting up at 4:20 in the morning for 19 years. It doesn't get any easier. I've been finding that as I'm moving, so I'm crawling like some poor marathon guy who's claps just before going into the mall. I'm kind of crawling towards the line, and it's getting kind of more and more difficult. But I can see the finishing line. It's going to make a huge effort. I think it does actually. I think it has actually had a big effect on my mental health, and has maybe made anything that is in there slightly worse. It's a tough gig. Can't complain. Such an exciting job. You've seen so much and done so much, you can. So I'll talk for about. I'm wabbling already. So Campbell's ramble. You have to bear with me. But I'm just going to try and talk off the top of my head, because there's a number of big issues in this. But I'll talk for about half an hour, and then you can ask any questions you like, anything you like. I remember once I interviewed Ringo Starr a few years ago, and there was this very formidable woman who was his manager, and she was a tough New York person. And just before the interview, she said, "If you ask him about the Beatles, he'll walk out. Don't ask about the Beatles." And I thought, oh, fuck, what the hell am I going to ask him about? His dreadful new album. And so I kind of in my mind constructed a question, which was, okay, so, you got to flatter them. You got to flatter them. So I went in and I said, "Oh, tell you what, this new album, the drumming is great." It was drumming. And I said, "But you've drummed in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and 90s. Give me some examples of the best drumming you've done." And he went, "Well, on Sgt. Pepper, it was the fills in A Day in the Life." And so we were off, and it was all fine. Anyway, this book, I'm not flogging the book. It's been flogged. I'm delighted to say, although I'd be delighted if you were to buy it, I'm delighted to say, and I'm really proud that it was a Sunday Times bestseller, because I think it resonated with people. And it was a big decision as to whether to do it. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write a book about animals because I'm passionate about animals. I'm fascinated by animals. I think that I was just reading before we went on about the death of a mountain gorilla who was rescued as an infant after militia in the Virunga Park killed his family for bushmeat. He was found clinging to his dead mother, and he was reared at a sanctuary there. And I was looking at this beautiful, beautiful being, and he died in the arms of his keeper, who'd been with him for 14 years, one of the very brave rangers. And I was looking to the eyes of this beautiful, beautiful being. And, you know, you look into the eyes of a great ape or an elephant, someone is there. That's the point. And I've always had this passion for animals. So I wanted to write about animals. I wanted to write my dog, who's not here, strangely. He's amazing. And I thought, you know, there's something in that. And then I thought, well, my dog really helped me when I had my breakdown. He was incredible. I'm convinced, consciously so, and I'll come to that. And, you know, dogs with mental health, dogs are incredible. That touch and that connection that you have with dogs, that emotional connection that you have with dogs. And I had that. And he got me through it in so many ways. Of course, my family and my wife and everything like that. There was something special about him. And I'll come to that in a second, actually, while I've got that thought. And then I thought, well, if I write about animals, I have to write about mental health. Am I brave enough? Am I brave enough to tell the world that I am bipolar affective disorder type 2? Because it's a big step, because you say something like that and then all of a sudden you become Mr. Bipolar, and every time there's something on, you know, you're defined by that. And so it was a big step. And there's lots of stuff to talk about. It's uncomfortable to talk about. It's one thing. It's bad enough when you're speaking to a psychiatrist about that stuff. What the hell's wrong with me? And he works it out and he gives you the medication. But then it was a big, and he was always saying to me, actually, Stephen, I was very lucky to be able to see him. He was always saying to me, you should tell the world, you should speak about this because it'll help people. And so I decided to go ahead. And then I realized I would have to write about adoption as well, because that was all tied up in my sense of identity. So everything was kind of tied up together. But when I had the breakdown, I'd been on, well, it was obviously an ongoing thing. And having a diagnosis, you have it all explained to you. All of a sudden, your life kind of falls into place and you realize, okay, that's why. And that explains that. And that explains my ups and it explains my downs. And my ups, my job is a very up thing. And I always say to people, try to explain my job, like doing phone-ins or debates or whatever, that, you know, I don't think deep, but I think fast. And you might not think it now, but I do think fast. And that's part of it. And that's why, you know, we all do things that are suited to our temperament. We all do things that are suited to our mentality. And we all do things that are suited to our psychology. And I guess that was it. But there are terrible lows as well throughout my life. And the sense of identity and adoption played into that. So there I was in the studio at New Broadcasting House, because sometimes I do it from there and my radio partner was in Salford. Sometimes we're in Salford together, but I was in London and I was to head up to Salford after the program. And I found this thing, because I was fixating about tragedy. I was fixating about, I wanted to save every single animal in the world. I was fixating about the tragedy, because once you get into animal rights and animal welfare, you go down a rabbit hole. Wrong metaphor. You go into this cave of horror. And I know people, Peter Egan, my very good friend, the actor who's involved, he says he hasn't slept properly for 25 years since he got in this. You see the horror of it all. And for elephants, I'm very fascinated by elephants. Huge emotional range elephants have, and self-awareness. And I saw this thing basically I was doing the program with Rachel, and I'd be doing I was doing this thing. I was looking online when she was doing her interviews, and I saw this terrible crash in India. Those trains hurtle through the forest at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they'd taken out a family of elephants, or half a family of elephants, and the other half of the family of elephants were trying to get to them to mourn and to touch them as they do. And there was sort of bodies everywhere and they were hanging off the bridge and stuff like that. And I was reading this with horror. Then all of a sudden, Rachel would go, and it's 8:10. And I go, all right, well, we're joined now by the president of the Motor Manufacturers Association. So these figures out at the moment are, and I was back to that. And I was everywhere. My head was everywhere, but I was still able to go. And Dominic Raab now joins us. That would be a laugh. So I was doing all that stuff and I was able to turn it. But eventually the artifice was no more. And I left the studio and everything just went boom. And I walked up Euston Road past Capital Radio, where I worked when I first came to London, where I worked with Alan Freeman, Fluff Freeman, and I worked with Kenny Everett. And by the time I got to Euston, I was in absolute tears and floods of tears. And I got to Euston, and there used to be grass just outside, just where the taxi rank is now. And I just fell to my knees and was like, I had my hands. I was just weeping, and everything had just crumbled. Everything had fallen on top of me. The world had fallen on top of me, and I couldn't. I'd got to that point that I couldn't go on, and I just thought, what's the point? And people were walking past, and I was on the ground like that. And I'm sure they must have been thinking, oh, that's the fellow who used to do that game show back in the 80s. You know, I wonder what he's like. But you know what London's like? People just kind of, walk past and have a quick glance or whatever. And so I got my phone and I rang home and I said, this is useless and blah, blah, blah. And then Tina said, my wife, she said, come home, get in a taxi and come home to us. Come home to your girls. I've got 4 daughters, and come home to me. And she said, and come home to Maxwell, my dog. And see, the thing about animals and mental health is really interesting, because if you have depression or even something wrong with you, the worst possible thing sometimes is to have to articulate it, to have to explain it, to have to answer questions. And even those you love most, who understand most, what's wrong? How are you? What do you want? What can I get you? What do you want to do? And those questions just drill into your head, because you're not in a place to be able to answer them or to rationalize. And then you have to explain. And when you explain, you're making it all worse, because you're trying to fight it, and by explaining it, you've lost, because you're bringing it up to the surface, which in some ways is good, in some ways is bad. But you're what's the word I'm looking for? You're exacerbating the pain. You don't want to talk to anyone, anyone who's got, suffers from depression now, who's with us. Well, you don't want to talk to anyone. You just want to, do nothing and just lie on the bed and try and cope with everything. And I'm lying on the bed, and I heard this little tinkle of his collar. I love him. He's just the most amazing Labrador Retriever. We're so, close. He's incredible dog. And he loves me, which is important for a show business personality. So and I heard the tinkle of his collar, and I heard him coming in. I'm lying on the bed, like hopeless and helpless. And he got up on the bed. He just lay his head on my chest and looked at me. And I felt this sort of surge of warmth and love going through me. And I know, until my dying day, I know that he was trying to help me. I absolutely know he was. And it's not Disney, it's Darwin, frankly, because in a pack situation, each pack member has to know how the other pack members are, so the pack member so the pack functions properly. And of course, dogs have this incredible emotional bond. We've co-evolved, and he's incredible. And at that moment, he was kind of my savior. It was amazing. Just getting back to the radio side of things. Just passing Euston Tower, which used to be Capital Radio. I remember when I came down from Aberdeen for the first time from North Sound Radio, where I worked on commercial radio. Capital Radio offered me to try me out on the air because I'd sent them a tape. My very first day, this was back in 1985, and they wanted to try me on the Saturday afternoon show, and I was absolutely terrified. I had to walk around Euston Road 3 or 4 times because I was so scared before it got going on. And I remember past Kenneth Williams, who used to live near there, and I thought, oh my God, Kenneth, this is getting even worse. I'm going back to on Capitol Road, and this is Kenneth Williams, and he was looking very stern and miserable. I remember I went in, and the producer said, because Kenny Everett was on before me, the producer said, come up and do a changeover with Ev. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I'm in a radio studio with Kenny Everett, and I went in, and there have been some terrifying moments in my life, but that was one of them. And he said, what's your name? And I said, Nicky Campbell, I'm on after you. He said, don't be too good, I shall have you garroted and dragged down Euston Road. And he was great, actually. He was very, very funny. But when I walked down, just before I had my breakdown, I felt that I had been garroted and dragged down Euston Road. So it was kind of, maybe he was a prophet. Maybe Kenny Everett was a prophet, the prophet, peace be upon him. And there it was, you know, he predicted it. Talking about terrifying moments, though, a seriously terrifying moment is when you meet the woman who gave birth to you. I mean, that is a pretty terrifying moment. How did that come to be? Meeting my birth mother, I had the most amazing adoption, incredible. I always say that, people say, oh, have you met your real mum? I said, well, my real mum is my mum. We lost her a couple of years ago. My real mum is the mum who adopted me, because she's the mum who cared for me. She's the mum who nurtured me. She's the mum who looked after me. She is my mum. My dad was my dad. When Scotland when Scotland beat England 0-0 at Wembley recently in the Euros, we beat England 0-0. I stretched for the phone. He died 15. He died in 1996. But we got there to the end. We hung on and we drew 0-0, and it was amazing. And I stretched for the phone to speak to him, to phone, you know. Still, he was my dad. Mum's my mum. But ever since I was born, I had this narrative. I knew there was this Irish nurse who was so generous and so loving and so caring, and she couldn't look after me, so she made sure that I went to the right family. She came over to Edinburgh. She was from Dublin. She had me adopted. My dad had a terrible hangover one day. I went to his friend and doctor, Ronnie Cameron, and Ronnie said, how are you? He said, well, apart from the hangover, Sheila, my mum, she's just had another miscarriage, her 5th miscarriage. And we're thinking of adopting. They had a daughter, my sister Fiona, already. And Ronnie Cameron said, well, there's this woman who's over from Dublin who comes to the practice. And this was 1960, because I was born in 61, April. And so maybe, and then things were put together, and I was adopted, and I was born in Portobello, and I was with her for 9 days. And then the social worker turned up early, and I've spoken to people in the boarding house, and she was hysterical. She dressed me and cleaned me, and for the last time, and handed me over, and her world was destroyed, but it had to happen. And then I had the most incredible family life, but still, because mum was a social worker, a psychiatric social worker. So she was way ahead of the curve on this stuff. So there's lots of people, frightened for all sorts of reasons, of being threatened, and, their fertility or whatever, wrongly. And it's terrible. We didn't tell their children that their children were adopted. Anyway, mum told me right at the word go and explained in age-appropriate terms what had happened. Oh, there's this woman, she couldn't look after you. She was amazing. She was wonderful. And she really cared for you, but she wasn't able to look after you and stuff like that. But still, I knew, all your life, you still think, I'm happy and I've got an incredible family and they love me and I love them, but who am I? Where did I come from? I one day need to know. And I went through ups and downs and ups and downs. I remember my 11th birthday party, which I write about in the book. No, it's my 10th birthday party, because it was double figures. I remember Dad saying, oh, it's double figures. and we were in Inverness because we used to go to the Highlands for holidays. So my holidays were rain and midge bites, and I wouldn't change them for the world. And I remember the cake came in, and I thought, I don't deserve it. I had this sense that a lot of adopted people have, that they're not worthy, they don't deserve it, they don't deserve to be where they are because they're not meant to be where they are. They're meant to be somewhere else. I remember the cake coming in, I remember bursting into tears. I remember Dad and Mum saying, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I remember then not wanting to tell them what was wrong because that would have made it even worse. And I remember wanting to be with my dog Candy. When I came back from school one day, and because Candy was my brother, he was a puppy when I was a baby, and we did everything together. We crawled together, we played together, we were inseparable. And we used to sniff. He taught me to sniff. We sniffed everything. I still sniff my food before I always, strange. And when I got together with Tina, she said, why are you sniffing your food? Everything. I said, a friend taught me. And he was incredible. We used to sniff it. When people came to the door, we used to both sniff them. And this could be excruciatingly embarrassing for my parents. And they go, down, down, down. It was a strain. I mean, it could be really embarrassing. And I'd say, down, get down, get down. You know, and I'm saying to the dog and they're saying to the child, get down, but they all got used to it. So I came back from school one day, we came back from the holidays, and I came back from school, and we'd come back, Dad was going to pick him up from the kennel, so I was going to see him again after the holidays. And I came back, and he always used to wait for me upstairs and look down. And I came back and I looked up and he wasn't there. And I was 11 years old, and I went in, and Mum was just standing in the dark in the hallway. And he was dead. He had to be put to sleep because he was ill at the kennel. They hadn't been well. And you know, I mean, still that moment is just one of those moments in my life that I will never ever forget. And that the depth of that grief, I still feel that. I've got a picture of Candy over there. I'll get them for you. Because we'd such a connection. It was incredible. You see that? That's Candy. Yeah, there he is. It's a Fox Terrier cross. Yeah. His mother disappeared one night. His mother was with the academics next door. Yeah, they were academics, my parents. My mum was a social worker, Dad was a middle manager, but they were the academics next door. And they had her, and she escaped one night, his mother Judy, and she came back and she was pregnant. So it was like, you know, everyone's seen Lady and the Tramp. It's like that deal came, you know, sort of back at the Italian restaurant. And then we had puppies, and that was it. So I wanted to be with Candy that day, and that I did. So anyway, through my life, birth mother, through my life, I went through ups and downs thinking about it. And what a lot of adopted people have is a sense of, you know, they have a denial. I think I had it for a long time. I think any adopted person from my era, it's very different now, but from my era, a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to trace this. You know, I don't want to be disloyal. Of course, I didn't want to be disloyal. That's one of the main things. They took me in. She didn't want me. I was rejected. They loved me. All that stuff. And that's all the kind of worthiness feeling as well. Do I deserve this? But I think any adopted person from that era, if you were to have an envelope there, say all the details and name of your birth mother and birth father and what they're doing now, and if you've got any siblings are in that envelope, I'm going to leave that room, and they will open the envelope. It's just the stuff you have to go through. So I was doing this talk show on Central Weekend Live, which was a late night debate program that I did on Central television, and it was fantastic. I loved it, like audience debate, and I did it with Anna Soubry for a long time, who was subsequent, of course, a Conservative MP, and then she was not a Conservative MP. I don't know what happened. She was with that party that lasted about 5 minutes. So there I was, and we did this debate one night, and this would have been about 1989, and we did 3 debates a night, and we did this debate on private detectives. You know, people with horror stories of private detectives, people who've had fantastic experiences with private detectives, dodgy private detectives, you know, good private detectives. One of those great discussions. And this private detective, and I went up to him afterwards and I said, would you be able to find my birth mother? And he said, yeah, if you know where she is and any details, because I got hold of my birth certificate and I'd seen the details. And he said, yeah, because we're all on computers. I mean, it's in 1989. We're all on computers. That was an incredible thing to say for a start. And I said, wow. And how long would it take? He went, 10 days max. So that was it. And you're not meant to do it that way. And you should be wearing an asbestos suit in lots of senses. You shouldn't be doing it like that. And so I did it, and I got a number, and I rang a number, or my then wife rang a number, and this sort of voice at the end said, hello. And my ex-wife said, I'd like to speak to you about an adoption in 1961. And my birth mother said, is that you, Deirdre? And Deirdre was her daughter, who had been adopted in Edinburgh in 1960. A sister. I knew about a sister vaguely, but it wasn't Deirdre, it was me. I knew about a sister vaguely because when I started, I think I'd known all along, but I'd kind of put it to one side. When I started seeing girls and having girlfriends when I was about 14 or 15 or 16, Mum took me to one side and she said, are any of your girlfriends, any of the girls you know, adopted? Because it was in Edinburgh, right? And so I said, why? She said, because you do have a birth sister. And I said, well, how old does she be? And she said, we'll be about a year and a half older than you. Do you know any of your friends adopted? I said, well, they're younger. So that was quite a conversation. So I knew about her. And when I met her, I'm sorry I'm bouncing about around a bit here because I'll get on to meeting my birth mother. When I eventually met, Deirdre became Esther. When I eventually met Esther, who was also adopted into Edinburgh, we were both, adopted into, middle-class families. We were both sent to private schools and my parents couldn't afford it. And I was sent to the Edinburgh Academy and she was sent to St. George's, which is a kind of brother and sister school. So when I did eventually meet her, after we'd both met our birth mother, we did that whole thing that a lot of people in Edinburgh do, and I'm sure other places. Who do you know? What do you know? What school do you go to? What do you know? All that stuff. And she said, I said, well, one of my best friends is, I don't know, his sister was at St. George's as Matthew Kreitman. And she said, oh, his big sister, Julia, was my best friend. And in fact, I said, well, Matthew Kreitman was big. She said, Julia was my best friend. And she said, the entire summer in 1978, I stayed with the Kreitman family because my parents were away. So I stayed with the Kreitman family. And I said, well, that was the year of the World Cup. Every day during the World Cup, I went back with Matthew and Ian, my friends, Ian Glenn, the actor now. I went back with Matthew and Ian. We went into their kind of snuggery and lay on the bin bags and the L-shaped sofa and smoked Benson and Hedges and watched the World Cup. And she said, well, I was there. I said, I remember you. So I remember Julia's friend. And she said, I remember Matthew's friends there. She was a kind of figure there lurking in the background. So quite incredible, that. So the birth mother, to cut a long story short, back to Stella, my birth mother. She, I'm expecting, I've spoken to her on the phone, obviously, but you don't get anything from a phone. I've seen a photograph, obviously, but you don't get anything from a photograph, really. And there I am in Dublin, waiting in a hotel foyer, and we're meant to be to, 1 o'clock. And now it's 2 o'clock, and now it's 3 o'clock. And I'm expecting this strong, wonderful, generous, kind woman who did the right thing, and she was strong and she was willful. And she knew exactly what she wanted, but she couldn't look after me. And she was 2 hours late, and eventually this kind of really disheveled woman walked in, and she'd been a matron in a hospital. That was her job, but she was an absolute mess, and she was bipolar, and she'd suffered all her life with bipolar. She'd taken a load of sleeping tablets. She was very closed down. She didn't want to talk about the past. But if you have two children adopted within 18 months of each other, it's kind of difficult stuff. And her brother had committed suicide. And there was loads of stuff. And she wanted to be my mum. That was the hardest thing of it all. She wanted to be my mum. And she wasn't my mum. My mum was, and then of course I had all the kind of, well, I want to be with mum and dad. I want my mummy. I want my daddy. You're pulled every way. But I had to know, and it wasn't an emotional thing. It was a journey of curiosity. I had to know who this woman was, and if I know who that woman was, I'll know who I am, etc., etc. So we sat down. Hello, 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 hello. I mean, that's scary. I mean, going to a studio with Kenny Everett, that's on another level of scared. That's further down the league of scared. Right. This is Manchester City scared. Going to a studio with Kenny Everett is Wolverhampton Wanderers scared, or even Burnley scared, or even, might I say, Rochdale FC scared. This is right up there. And she said two things though. She phoned and she phoned and she wrote and she wrote and she wrote. And I didn't read. Eventually, it became so much that I put the letters in a box, and I didn't read them. And I feel great shame over the years, great shame. But she, it was fulfilling for her, and we spoke occasionally. But she was like overwhelming and overweening, and it was difficult. And my marriage was breaking up at the time, but then I met Esther, and we really bonded, my birth sister. And I didn't feel quite so bad when Esther said all the same stuff that I was saying about Stella and how difficult it was. And it was difficult to get at all below the surface, to get anything other than total superficiality. Because we're both intelligent people. We wanted to know stuff. We wanted to know what happened and how she felt and who our fathers were and all that. We wanted to know that stuff. Nothing. But she said two things, right, in that first meeting, which was strange. And I always thought they were strange. And one of the first things she said to me was, because she'd buried so much. And she said, do you like dogs? I said, yeah, I do like dogs. And I came to realize years later, do you like animals? Do you like dogs? It's a pretty good empathy test, I think, to check somebody out, I think. And the other thing she said is, she said, I love poetry. I love William Butler Yeats. I really love the Wild Swans at Cool. Do you know the Wild Swans at Cool? And I said, no. The Wild Swans, she mentioned it 2 or 3 times, the Wild Swans at Cool. Life went on. And how long have I spoken for, Stephen? I lost track. When did we start?
25 minutes, Nicky. And
okay.
It's wonderful. Don't stop.
Well, that's a matter of opinion. So so the Wild Swans at Cool. I had that in my mind. So, right, let me come to it. Later on, let me just whiz you through a bit. I did manage to track down, I did manage to trace and find out. I met my birth father, who was Irish and Republican and garrulous and interesting and clearly an incredibly attractive person, an incredibly self-centered person, incredibly entertaining person. And he'd had an interesting life, and he was great to be with. And that but meeting Esther was incredible. I often say on Long Lost Family, it's the sibling thing is so powerful. Meeting siblings, meeting your sister, because your parent is like just an old person that you've never known. That sounds callous, but but with your sibling, you've got a kind of cultural hinterland. You might have some because be similar ages, and you've got stuff in common. It's just easier. I think it's easier. So one night, many years later, I was having a whiskey downstairs, and I thought, thinking about stuff, and I thought, there's that box of letters upstairs. So I went up and I opened them. I opened it, like opened envelopes from 1990 and 1991, letters that hadn't been opened. Just saying it now, it's awful, but it's just a kind of escape from all that. Like I went into it and I escaped from it. I went into it and I escaped from it, but I needed to have got into it, because if I was sitting now, and she's gone now, my birth father's gone now, and my mum's gone now, and my dad's gone now. And mum was completely supportive. I wish I could have spoken to dad about this more. I think it hurt him, because he felt they'd lost me, but he hadn't. When I told him, when he was lying dying, I told him how much I loved him. I saw his eyes light up. So I read these letters, and there were little hints. There was stuff in there about the woman that she was and would have been before all this and before her breakdowns. There was stuff in there, between the lines of drivel, the lines of trivia, the lines of nothingness, but there was stuff there. And then I thought, and I'd never read it. And then I thought, the wild swans at Cool. And I don't drink whiskey, actually. For a Scotsman, it's a terrible thing to say. I drink bourbon, but I keep that very, very quiet. This is Chatham House, isn't it? Yeah, because and people always give me malt whiskey, like for presents and stuff like that, and I kind of give it to some other people. I like bourbon and ginger ale, which is just, terrible admission. So the wild swans at Cool, and I got the poem. I've actually got it here because I read it here on the train. I'll give it a go. The trees are in their autumn beauty. The woodland paths are dry. Under the October twilight, the water mirrors a still sky. Upon the brimming water among the stones are 59 swans. The 19th autumn has come upon me since I first made my count. I saw before I had well finished, all suddenly mount and scatter, wheeling in great broken rings upon their clamorous wings. I've looked upon these brilliant creatures, and now my heart is sore. All's changed since I, hearing at twilight, the first time on this shore, the bell beat of their wings above my head, trod with a lighter tread. Unwearied still, lover by lover, they paddle in the cold, companionable streams or climb the air. Their hearts have not grown old. Passion or conquest, wander where they will, attend upon them still. But now they drift on the still water, mysterious, beautiful. Among what rushes will they build? By what lake's edge or pool delight men's eyes when I awake some day to find they have flown away? And it's a poem suffused with melancholy and regret, and beauty and peace are transient. But the thing about it is, it was written for a woman on the estate where he was living who had lost her son. 59 swans. One was missing. 59, not 60. He talks about the lovers. And I thought, I don't know. But she mentioned it so many times in our first meeting. So we lost mum 2 or 3 years ago, just before COVID, actually. We had the funeral. And it was a wonderful, wonderful funeral. It's a humanist funeral. She was a lifelong atheist, but if there was a heaven, she'd be front of the queue. And friends came, and she was loved. There were loads of people there. She was remarkable. She was 96 when she died, and she was still driving till just before the end. And she was, she'd been a radar operator during the war at D-Day. And she had incredible stories to tell. I remember one story she told was, it was the time of Me Too, which Me Too was really taken off, and it was brilliant. I've got daughters, and the whole thing was fantastic. And I said, Mum, when you were in the RAF, you know, D-Day and stuff like that, she said, oh, it's really exciting. They said, oh, we can't take any leave, and she was very moving. She spoke about the Ruhr Valley and after the war. She just said that. She said that, you know, all we saw it as was he was trying to get us, so we wanted to get him back. And she didn't. And she said after the war, she thought profoundly and deeply, and she cried when she told me about the innocents in the Ruhr Valley, and she's plotting. And I said, did anyone ever get handsy with you then? And I didn't say it, use that word, actually. She did. There was any of that when you were in the RAF? She went, no. She says, there's one time. She said, there was one time there was an American. Yes, he was putting his hand on my bottom and stuff like that. But there was these absolutely charming Polish airmen who came to my rescue and sorted him out. So I thought it was a great sort of picture of the RAF at the time. We celebrated, and I left the crematorium. I went out afterwards. Everyone was still in there. I went out. I had to have some air before standing in a line and thanking people, and then going off to, you know, get pissed, which was great. We just had so many laughs and so many memories. And I looked outside, and there was this guy there. There was this chap there, and Ronnie Cameron, the doctor, who was a friend of my dad's, who said to my dad, there's this woman who's coming to the surgery from Dublin who is giving birth, and she needs to have her baby boy adopted. And Ronnie Cameron was our GP. I knew Ronnie Cameron well. He had the fob watch and the double-breasted, and he smelt of gin at 10 in the morning, and he was great. He was obviously it was all under control. He was a fantastic character. He was dry and he was laconic, and he was at Edinburgh, and he gave me a jelly baby after I'd saw him with a cough and everything like that. And he was great. He was great. And he had a pockmarked face, a distinguished pockmarked face. And I went out the funeral and stood outside, and there was this guy with his coat. He's maybe about 66, 67 years old, putting a coat on. And I knew the face, and I thought, oh my God. And he turned around, and it was Angus Cameron, Ronnie's son. And he was a spitting image of his father. I don't know why I'm telling you this. It was just a moment. It's just a moment. That's it. That was Mum. She was my real mum. She was my mum. Dad was my real dad. He was my dad. And I miss them every day. And my dog's 13 and a half, Maxwell. And he's in great form. And I love him.